Hello, Dr. G here. Let me talk about a food that, according to the available research, may actually reduce your risk of dying. Now, when I talk about a natural foods diet, which happens to be the title of this channel, I often talk about whole foods and I talk about nutritional density. Well, there's one natural food that makes a lot of sense because it's whole and it's nutrient dense. And that's nuts, like almonds, Brazil nuts, hazelnuts, macadamia nuts, walnuts, pecans, and you get the picture. There's some other ones. So what evidence do we have that nuts might be healthy? Well, first off, there's long-term observational studies like the Adventist Health Study, the Iowa Women's Health Study, the Nurses Health Study, and the Physicians Health Study. All of these large studies showed a health benefit from eating nuts. Now, in these studies, the mortality rates were improved, especially for cardiovascular disease mortality. And that happens to be the #1 killer still of Americans. But there are also improvements in cancer, pulmonary disease, and infectious diseases shown in these studies. Now, total all-cause mortality reduction was about 20%, and that was with the consumption of about 7 servings of nuts per week. Now, how much is a serving of nuts? Unfortunately, I did not extract that information for you. If I had to guess off the top of my head, I would say 23.5 almonds. Now, this year there were 2 articles published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. One was a meta-analysis of many epidemiologic studies, which showed significant overall reduction in mortality risk with increased nut consumption. The second article reported the results from the Physicians Health Study that I just mentioned. This study showed a nice dose-response relationship. It showed that doctors that ate the most nuts got the most benefit. So those doctors in that study who had 5 servings or more of nuts per week had an amazing 26% reduction in overall mortality compared to dumb doctors who didn't eat nuts. This was shown even after controlling for other risk factors. But besides the observational studies, we also have evidence from a large interventional study. The Predimed study, which looked at 7,447 middle-aged at-risk Spaniards. This was a randomized intervention trial comparing a Mediterranean diet plus nuts, which was compared to our standard recommendation of having a low-fat diet and be good, just like the American Heart Association advises. Now, in this study, they gave the nut group 30 grams of mixed nuts per day, which included walnuts, hazelnuts, and almonds. Now, the group getting nuts had a 30% reduction in cardiovascular disease and a whopping 49% reduction in stroke. And that was compared to the standard recommendation of eating a low-fat diet, which is still what most doctors in America tell you today. So this study tells us either nuts are good or the American Heart Association diet is bad. Now, I'm not sure which is the truth, but because I like nuts and because they're natural and because they taste good, I'm going for the nuts. Now, because nuts are high in fat, people are often advised to restrict nut intake for fear of weight gain. Now, to help us out here, there's 2 small studies that might give us the answer to this. And they were both done overseas and reported in the European Journal of Nutrition and the British Journal of Nutrition. In both of these studies, women were asked to eat almonds in addition to their regular food. Now, despite the increased calorie and fat intake of the added almonds, in both of these studies, the women didn't gain any weight or gain any fat. Now, they were instructed to eat the almonds in addition to their regular diet. But what they did is they actually decreased their caloric consumption of other foods. Now, why is that? Well, if we had to guess, we'd say maybe the nuts made them full, satiety factors, or maybe the nutritional factor or benefit from nuts decreased their hunger. But anyway, they decreased the other foods that they ate and they didn't gain any weight. So why would nuts be good? Now, as I said, they're a low carbohydrate food. In other words, they're high in fat. In fact, the fatty nuts like Brazil nuts, macadamia nuts, pecans can be up to 90% fat. But remember, fat is an efficient form of energy, and efficiency can be very helpful when you have health problems like obesity, diabetes, or one of the other modern diseases that are exploding today. Now, nuts contain mostly unsaturated fats, including the omega-6s and the monosaturated fats. They also contain magnesium, selenium, iron, potassium, trace minerals, proteins, B vitamins, vitamin E, and also they are a decent source of fiber. Now, before you go out and start gorging on bags of nuts, remember they contain anti-nutrients. And these are meant to protect the seed of the nut tree. The mama nut tree doesn't want her babies eaten. So what this means is nuts contain chemicals that prevent effective digestion by pests, like you. Nothing personal. Now, one of these anti-nutrients is phytic acid. Phytic acid can be reduced by soaking or roasting the nuts. Now, the problem with roasting is it can reduce some of the nutrients, especially if it's done at very high temperatures, like when they roast in oil. Now, as an alternative, you can soak nuts for 12 to 24 hours at room temperature, and this will reduce the phytic acid levels. You can also roast raw nuts at home, and there you can control the temperature and keep it low, like 170 to 200 degrees. And this is also effective at reducing phytic acid. Now remember, we're all unique, and I strongly suggest that you observe how you feel and how your digestive system is functioning when you're eating nuts. Be observant. I recommend to my health coaching clients to keep a diary. Paying attention is an important asset in our modified world. This is Dr. G. Thanks so much for watching, and please subscribe to our channel.